Good morning, this is World Talks. I'm Anna Kalczyńska. Europe is paving the way for a European defence strategy with a long-awaited EU white paper on defence. In the meantime, China is reportedly considering joining a peacekeeping force as part of the European-led coalition of the willing to secure a ceasefire in Ukraine, the German media outlet Die Welt reported, citing unnamed diplomatic sources. China has positioned himself as a neutral party to Russia's war against Ukraine, but has remained a key ally of Russia throughout the full-scale invasion. What would this development entail for the fragile situation on the ground in Ukraine? And what could be the European leaders' response in light of its defense policy? To delve on these implications of the dangerous game, I'm joined by Sigita Struberga, Secretary General from the Latvian Transatlantic Organization, and her research are transatlantic relations and European security, Russia, China's foreign policy, and strategic communication. Good morning, madam. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
So Europe has issued a long-awaited white paper document describing European defence strategy. What is your take on that?
So first of all, for me, it is, of course, an important step taken, and it is also about important signaling, not only to EU member states, but also to other actors. So basically what Europe is doing now, Europe is really working on strengthening its defense, and this is very important. On another hand, also, this paper is signaling about those gaps we still have and what we need to solve. And the third thing, which I really would like to also mention, is that white papers also signals about relations with NATO. So no one in Europe is going to replace NATO with something, but rather within the framework of NATO, EU and wider Europe is going to strengthen and already strengthens its defense by own activities, which is very important in here.
So the EU is ramping up investments in defense. Eastern countries do what it takes to grow their military potential. But what are the real the weaknesses that you've mentioned that you see? And what is the real power, actually, of Europeans in this conflict, not only with Russia, as it seems, but now also potentially with US also?
I wouldn't say that we have potential conflict with US. I wouldn't agree on that. But what I would say that it is also about the EU as a global power. And here, I think the main struggle is about European countries' self-perception, because quite often what we hear from middle powers globally is that Europe basically is seen as a quite strong actor, or really strong actor in the global system. The question is how Europe self-perceives. And the second question is what Europe is ready to do, what compromises Europe is ready to do in order to strengthen not only itself as normative power, which Europe is, no doubt, or economic power. Again, there is no doubt that Europe is economic power, but then the next question comes, what about the defense and security? And here are those homeworks to be done in order to get rid of the dependency of US. And here I would like also to underline that it does not mean that we will definitely lose a partner in face of US. It is rather not to be so dependent on our partner's goodwill. And this is what we have to work on.
Exactly. The goodwill here is a key issue, as Steve Witkoff, special envoy to the Middle East, dismissed European post-war security efforts as a posture and a pose, quote unquote. So what exactly do the Americans expect from the Europeans? What is their vision of the Europeans in taking care for and securing peace on the continent?
This is I think, $1 million question, you know. I'm not sure that anyone of us can definitely say what exactly President of United States is expecting from Europe at the moment. But it would be the simple answer. But on another hand, it is clear that what is needed is indeed to strengthen security through defense spending, and this is what Trump has underlined for a long term already, and it's not an issue of just the second presidency. Then also, of course, it is about building up other capabilities, and it would be rather part also of the answer to the first question, and it can be integrated in this question as well. So it is not only about defense spending or building up capabilities, but for example, what is missing also is the shortages of human resources. Build up armies from perspective of human resources. Mm-hmm. This is also an issue. What maybe U.S. Administration is not that much expecting, but what else we should do is better regulation on defense, strengthening our capabilities in dimensions of cyber, artificial intelligence, etc., as well as we have to do something with air and missile defense gap, and of course intelligence gathering.
All right, so let me now move to the theoretical Chinese component, as China is reportedly considering joining the European-led coalition of the willing for peacekeeping in Ukraine. How significant could China's participation be in terms of global diplomacy and military balance, if possible?
Yeah, this is again a very interesting issue which is raised at the moment. First of all, this Chinese involvement has not been so evident recently, but if we look back, then China has been also suggested peace plan, which was not efficient, and etc. So basically, I would say that China would benefit from situation if Trump would failure to get both parties to peace talks, and also China, of course, would benefit from more actors around peace negotiations table. By the way, during Munich Security Conference, Wang Yi, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of China, very experienced diplomat, was the one who was very much supporting the European countries in the narrative about having more actors around the table. So this would allow China to navigate more successfully in there. But also thinking of Chinese presence either in negotiation talks or with Chinese soldiers' presence in Ukraine, it would lead to, I would say, kind of unprecedented Chinese presence on European ground. And it also, of course, signals to Chinese, or China reads it as a certain weakness of Europe. But also, this type of plan, I don't think is a plan which United States would see as a good one, because Chinese increasing presence in the region is not what US sees as beneficial.
Mm-hmm. Well, an EU diplomatic source suggested that China's involvement could make Russia more accepting of a peacekeeping force in Ukraine. So do you think Moscow could actually agree to this, given its past rejection of European NATO troops in Ukraine?
At the moment, we have no signals that that Russia would agree on that. At least I don't see this type of signals. What I see in Russia now, or from Russian side, is making this process as slow as possible and sending diverse signals. So I don't think that we are so close to clear agreements. But China's factor in this sense could be the one which could make pressure on Russia indeed. And taking in consideration Russia's dependencies of China, of course, Russia would more likely to agree.
Interesting development. Thank you so much, Sigita Struberga, Secretary General from the Latvian Transatlantic Organization. Thank you for joining us this morning, madam.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Stay tuned to TVP World. World news are coming up.